Man is the measure of all things. So said the great Greek sophist Protagoras, according to Plato in his dialogue dedicated to that same sophist. And with those words, Protagoras articulated the view of the not only the class of his day that we call the sophists, those who purported to be wise, and taught others and sold their teaching on the basis of the fact that they were accounted to be wise men. But so also says our contemporary world that man is the measure of all things, that we determine things in accordance with our wisdom and in accordance with our intentions. So much so that in contemporary literary theory, it's often maintained that our language not only describes the world, but to some degree creates the world and measures it at the same time. And thereby we are trapped in a sort of linguistic paradox whereby we can, the world with which we seek to describe things is in fact just a projection of our capacities to articulate it. And with that in mind, what looms large as a possibility, and we're seeing the consequences of it in our very midst at present, is the collapse of a common objective world, and one in which things such as justice, truth, beauty, and goodness are said to not exist at all. To some degree, the character that we're looking at in our play, Oedipus, represents such a man. He is a man who is the measure of all things. He's a man who is accounted to be wise. He's a man, as I said to you in our last installment, who solved the riddle of the Sphinx, and thereby demonstrated that he had the intellect and the wisdom to guide people truly. And he delivered them, um, give a little backdrop, he delivered them from the curse of the gods. Not only the Sphinx, but the gods who were plaguing that same city that he came to rescue. So to some extent, this figure of Oedipus is the best representation of the view that man is the measure of all things. And in that sense, as I say, these plays, of which Oedipus is just one of many, these tragic plays that were dedicated to Dionysus and therefore a festival to the god, are a challenge to the supremacy of the gods and the ways of human beings. And in his very hubris, and I said that this word hubris is often translated as pride, but to some degree it's more accurately rendered as an overreaching. This man Oedipus overreaches his station as a man by claiming to be able to lead human society as the measure of all things in and of himself. And what we're going to find out in the play Oedipus is that Oedipus himself will have to learn through his own bitter suffering that man is not the measure of all things and is, on the contrary, measured by the gods, and he is found wanting. Now, last time I mentioned that Oedipus in himself also plays something like the role of what the Greeks call a pharmakon, which is both a poison and also a cure. And in that sense, he functions the same way in Leviticus 16 we see the scapegoat does in the understanding of the ancient Hebrew peoples on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement. There are two animals. One is sacrificed as a propitiation to God, and the other is a scapegoat. And the high priest lays his hands upon this goat and places the sins of the people upon this goat, and then drives it into the wilderness. And so the sins of the people are laid upon a beast. And to some degree, I think in this play, uh, Oedipus, which is at a religious festival and is fundamentally a religious play, although it's not the religion of the ancient Jewish people, is nonetheless expostulating on similar sorts of themes, the themes of the limitations of human capacity to master themselves, the need for atonement, and the need for a recognition that the gods prophesy rightly. That all these things are actually maintained in the play Oedipus the King. And for that reason, it has, as I say, maintained its place over the course of many generations, millennia, as a play that fundamentally expresses something profound and powerful about the human condition. And in that, it also represents something, and we're not going to look at this on this course, but in the later play written by Sophocles, in the play Antigone, there's something called an ode to man that praises the laws of the city. And it does so because it and speaks of this paradox of man's capacity and the riddle that man is to himself. And I'll just read an extract from that. And this is called the Ode to Man. It's a little extract that the chorus speaks in the second antistrophe. And it says as follows: passing the wildest flight, thought, art, the cunning and skill that guide man now to the light, but now to counsels of ill. If he honors the laws of the land and reveres the gods of the state, proudly his cities shall stand. But a cityless outcast I rate, though those who so bold in his pride from the path of right doth depart. Ne'er may I sit by his side or share the thoughts of his heart. And there's terrific irony here, but one of the things that's emphasized in this passage is that man is a riddle to himself. He has the capacity like the gods, and yet nonetheless cannot understand, and to some degree even brings himself down and brings himself to naught. And with that in mind, I wanted to say one final thing before I progress into an actual look at the play itself in its specifics, and we're going to do that. And that's the name Oedipus itself. Now, scholars, when they have looked at this word, have noted that it sounds like, and in fact, Sophocles himself mentions in the play that his name Oedipus comes from the fact that his feet are swollen. Oedipus sounds like swollen foot. Pus sounds like pedos, a foot. But there's also another meaning here, which scholars have suggested, which I find rather interesting. Again, Sophocles himself doesn't mention it, but the name Oedipus sounds a lot like something else here, which I think is an important aspect of this play. And it's a derivation of two words that seem rather similar to Oedipus, namely Oedipu, as I've written it here in English, a transliteration Oedipu, which is Oida is the first person aorist here, I see, or even I know. And if you add the interrogative particle here, the semicolon in Greek, the question mark in English, the question is, what do I see? What do I know? And the irony in the play is precisely that Oedipus claims that he is able to see and able to know better than the gods themselves about what is going to come in the future. And so that is really the issue here. And this is precisely why the tragedy ensues, and why it is, in fact, such a challenge to the gods, why there is not only hubris, but a hamartia, a missing of the mark. Because Oedipus has to some degree, and he doesn't know this at the outset, but we discover it as the play progresses, he has claimed, or as his parents have, to be able to know better than the gods themselves about what is fated to transpire. And so the play falls is really what it's seeking to demonstrate, and it's doing this at a festival to Dionysus, is to establish that the gods truly rule. And because of that, they will be able to accurately prophesy about the future. Whereas if they don't, then both Oedipus and his parents, Jocasta, and Oedipus's father, whose name escapes me at the second, have sought to evade the prophecy that came to them, namely that their son would murder his father and marry his mother. And they sought to evade that prophetic fate by getting rid of the baby in his infancy. And if the Jocasta and Oedipus and the human actors here have managed to be wise and managed to be all-seeing and all-knowing, in spite of what the gods had fated, then the gods have no power. And the gods are no more able to foresee the future than blind chance. And this is something that Jocasta, his mother slash wife, actually says. He says that chance rules all, and we should all just live randomly based on that fact. And that's around line 977 and onwards there. But Oedipus actually rules, and this is the message of Oedipus the king, is that the gods themselves do see the future. They do have prophets that provide insight into this, and Tiresias, the blind man, is the mouthpiece for the gods here. And he becomes proof in his person that the gods do in fact rule, and that the oracles that have been pronounced and read by men do in fact come to pass. And as a consequence, there are severe limitations placed on human wisdom. And so the claim that man is the measure of all things is itself nothing but hubris. It misses the mark. It does not actually reflect the reality of the human situation. And so I just find this extraordinarily interesting, and it does deal with the perennial question of human philosophy. How do we live wise lives? How do we know what is going to happen in the future, and how will we live our lives in a way that is human as a consequence of that? But it's clear in Sophocles' rendering, Oedipus the King, that Oedipus himself is the demonstration of a man who sought to live a life in contradiction to the god's own will and paid the punishment for it. And he became a scapegoat. So it's really a play about mankind and the problem of sin in the human condition. But let me get to the text here. Let me get to the text, and we'll read some of the lines. We're just going to read the first, get through the first few hundred lines here, and we'll comment on it more particularly. But let's attend to the text specifically here. Now, the stage directions are relatively sparse here and brief. We're simply told the Scaena, which is the stage, in front of the palace of Oedipus at Thebes. To the right of the stage near the altar stands the priest with a crowd of children. Oedipus emerges from the central door. And he says this: "Children, young sons and daughters of old Cadmus, why do you sit here with your suppliant crowns? The town is heavy with a mingled burden of sounds and smells, of groans and hymns and incense. I did not think it fit that I should hear of this from messengers, but came myself, I, Oedipus, whom all men call the Great." He turns to the priest. "You are old, and they are young. Come, speak for them. What do you fear or want, that you sit here suppliant? Indeed, I'm willing to give all that you may need. I would be very hard should I not pity suppliants like these." And then they've come in his midst with brands, supplicating him, pleading with him to deliver them from a calamity. And the priest says, "O ruler of my country, Oedipus, you see our company around the altar, you see our ages. Some of us, like these, who cannot yet fly far, and some of us heavy with age. These children are the chosen among the young, and I the priest of Zeus. Within the marketplace sit others crowned with suppliant garlands at the double shrine of Pallas, and the temple where Ismenus gives oracles by fire. King, you yourself have seen our city reeling like a wreck already. It can scarcely lift its prow out of the depths, out of the bloody surf. A blight is on the fruitful plants of the earth. A blight is on the cattle in the fields. A blight is on our women, that no children are born to them. A god that carries fire, a deadly pestilence is on our town, strikes us and spares not. and the house of Cadmus is emptied of its people, while Black Death grows rich in groaning and in lamentation. We have not come as suppliants to this altar, because we thought of you as of a god, but rather judging you first of men in all the chances of this life, and when we mortals have to do with more than man. So as I said to you here, the play begins with the suppliants coming to him not as a god. They're not asking the gods for deliverance. Even the priest of Zeus is not coming to Oedipus as to a god. They're coming to him as a man, and they are thinking that a man has delivered them from the calamities of the past. He's the best of men, and can the best of men deliver mankind, and in this case, the city of Thebes, from the calamity? That's what they've come to him to do. And he notes the reason why they do this. You came, line 35, and by your coming saved our city, freed us from the tribute which we paid of old to the Sphinx, cruel singer. This you did in virtue of no knowledge we could give you, in virtue of no teaching. It was God that aided you, men say, and you are held with God's assistance to have saved our lives. Now, Oedipus, greatest in all men's eyes, here, falling at your feet, we all entreat you, find us some strength for rescue. Perhaps you'll hear a wise word from some god. Perhaps you will learn something from a man. For I have seen that for the skilled of practice, the outcome of their counsels live the most. Noblest of men, go and raise up our city. Go and give heed. For now this land of ours calls you its savior, since you saved it once. So let us never speak about your reign as of a time when first our feet were set, secured on high, but later fell to ruin. Raise up our city, save it and raise it up. Once you have brought us luck with happy omen, be no less now in fortune. If you will rule this land as you now rule it, better to rule it full of men than empty. For neither tower nor ship is anything when empty, and none live in it together. So they call upon him to save them once more, save them as a man, to act as a salvific figure. Now, for a Christian audience, these topics, these themes, and even these terms are full of meaning. And the very terminology of the tragedy in terms of the hamartia, the missing of the mark, which again is one of the terms. This word hamartia is one of the words that the New Testament uses for sin. As I said to you, the whole study of sin in Scripture is called hamartology. And the idea of a savior to save us from the problem of sin, and the belief that there is a need for some sort of redemption to take place and atonement through the means of wisdom. All of these things touch on themes that are not only here in Sophocles' great work, but obviously also are centerpieces of the New Testament, and even at the heart of the Christian faith. And for that reason, even though Sophocles himself is obviously no Christian, there's something in the wisdom of these words that have, as I say, inspired generations to hold that there are many, there's much wisdom in the great works of literature of tradition for which we can benefit and speak to the general awareness of the general revelation of God to men, even through the counsel of their own limited prophetic works. So here in the prologue, we get the theme of the quest for identity as well. And the mystery that we are going to seek to uncover here, and Oedipus himself is going to have to get to the bottom of, is the mystery of who has killed the old king, the king whose name was Laos. That was the name of his father, Laos. Who has killed that man? Because that, it turns out, we'll see in a second, is the reason why the city is under a blight, as it says here, a blight, a blight, a blight. There's a miasma, there's a sickness that has come upon the city, and the and the gods are destroying the city. And it's no longer can be attributed merely to the work of the Sphinx. It is a sort of a pestilence, and it becomes clear that the pestilence stems directly from Apollo. Apollo is destroying the city. Now, I should say something about the word Apollo. It comes from the word apollumi, which is to destroy in Greek, and Apollo is the sun god. And if you think about what the sun is like in a climate in Athens in the summer, when you can cook an egg on the pavement, it's so hot. The destructive power of the sun is destroying the city of Thebes, which was sown from Cadmus's teeth. It mentions a couple of times. This is again an old myth of how Thebes arose out of the teeth of a serpent. And again, if you want to connect broad Christian themes with the story here, we could connect the fact that these people are sown from the teeth of the serpent. And are cursed as a consequence of their connection with the serpents. Obviously, this has connections, at least thematically, with the account given in Genesis 3. But the quest for identity is at the heart of the study of Oedipus the King. Who is Laos's killer becomes the first question. And the second question is, who is Oedipus? He thinks he knows who he is. He thinks that he is a self-made man, that he's come into his position because of his own brilliance, because of his own good fortune, because the fates have smiled upon him, when in fact it's exactly the opposite, which is transpiring. So here at the outset, there's this, the priest of Zeus comes to Oedipus on behalf of the city, and he, supplicating him, imploring him, pleading before him to rescue them and save them now as he had done in days of yore. And we have to understand that some time has transpired since he first saved them, because now, since the time he first saved them, he has married his mother and he's had children with her. So years have passed. And Oedipus then says this: I pity you, children. You have come full of longing, but I have known the story before you told it only too well. I know you are all sick. Yet there is not one of you, sick though you are, that is as sick as I myself. Your several sorrows each have single scope and touch but one of you. My spirit groans for city and myself and you at once. You have not roused me like a man from sleep. Know that I have given many tears to this, gone many ways wandering in thought. But as I thought, I found only one remedy, and that I took. I sent Menocius's son Creon, Jocasta's brother, to Apollo, to his Pythian temple, that he might learn there by what act or word I could save this city. So he sent them to the Apollo's a temple in Pythos, and this is to the Delphic Oracle. Now, the Delphic Oracle is famed throughout the ancient world as being the preeminent oracle, and it's the oracle dedicated to Apollo. And the Pythonesque serves there, and you'll read of that account in the Book of Acts as well. And Christian testimony is that after the birth of Christ, the one of the proofs of the fulfillment of prophecies in Scripture were not only the fact that they were fulfilled, the New Testament fulfilled the promises of the Old Testament, but also that the oracles went silent of the pagan gods at that point. Before that, they had still uttered forth. From that point onward, they went silent. And this one in particular, where the Pythonesque, the priestess of Apollo, served, he sent his brother-in-law, Creon, to find out who or by what means he can save the city. And so he sent him, and he's waiting for Creon, his brother-in-law, to return home. And I'll go back to the text here, 73. As I count the days, it vexes me what ails him. He's gone far longer than he needed for the journey. But when he comes, then may I prove a villain if I do not do all the god commands. Now, throughout this, I need to draw it to your attention, because for you who are reading this or watching it for the first time, this is probably a relatively new story. I need to reiterate what I said last time. This is an ancient myth, the myth of Oedipus, and what happened at Thebes, namely the incestuous um, um, relationship that a man had with his mother, and the curse that was brought on the Thebes, such that the Thebans are associated ever thereafter with this horrible act that violates every human taboo, and murdered his father to boot. So all of these things are well known to the Greek audience. And so when Oedipus gives his prophecies here and says things like, may I prove a villain if I do not do all the God commands, the audience is basically groaning because they know that he is the villain. And when he says at the outset of this speech, 59, I know you are all sick, but there's not one of you sick though you are that is as sick as I am myself. Everyone in the audience is groaning because they know that this man is an atrocity in his person by his actions. He's brought this upon the city. We all know this. And so this is the great irony of Oedipus the King, is that the audience already knows that Oedipus is the source of the calamity that's been brought on the city, and he claims to know himself and to be able to, by his own human wisdom, be able to solve every riddle that comes onto his path. He's very convinced of his own abilities to do so, and he's motivated by a very quite laudable desire to be the best man he can be, and to do his best to get to the bottom of the riddle. And so we know more than Oedipus does. In fact, everybody knows more than Oedipus does. The man who claims to know everything, in fact, is the least knowing of all men. And he will become, though he claims to be wise, will become a fool by the end of the play. And as I say, driven from their midst like a beast. And the priest, however, says in response to Oedipus's kind words, thank you for your gracious words. Your servants here signal that Creon is this moment coming. Oedipus, his face is bright. O holy Lord Apollo, grant that his news too may be bright for us and bring us safety. The priest, it is happy news, I think, for else his head would not be crowned with sprigs of fruitful laurel. Oedipus, we will know soon. He's within hail. Lord Creon, my good brother, what is the word you bring us from the god? Creon enters the stage. A good word, for things hard to bear themselves, if in the final issue all is well, I count complete good fortune. What do you mean? What you have said so far leaves me uncertain whether to trust or to fear. Creon, if you will hear my news before these others, I am ready to speak, or else to go within. So Creon suggesting it might be better if the two of them had a little private word rather than say it in front of the others. Oedipus, speak it to all. The grief I bear it more for these than for my own heart. Not true. Again, the irony here, the irony, by the way, is when the audience is aware of more than the speaker himself is aware. There's a deeper level of awareness and knowledge. And again, a man whose name is Oedipus, who claims to be have prophetic insight and to have a great deal of wisdom and knowledge, is the most foolish and the most blind of all of the characters in the play. And this is something that Sophocles will bitterly emphasize by contrasting him with his foil, the character that we've already met in Homer's Odyssey, the blind prophet Tiresias. But we'll come to him in a moment. Creon says, okay, I will tell you then what I heard from the god. King Phoebus, Apollo, in plain words, commanded us to drive out a pollution from our land. Pollution grown ingrained within the land. Drive it out, said the god, not cherish it till it's past cure. Oedipus, what is the rite of purification? How shall it be done? By banishing a man, said Creon, or expiation of blood by blood, since it is murder guilt which holds our city in this destroying storm. So, two means are suggested here. You can either drive him out like a scapegoat, or you can execute him. Propitiation. The two goats on young, two animals on the Day of Atonement. The one was for sacrifice, the other driven from their midst. You can do either of them, says this revelation from Apollo. Oedipus, 102. Who is this man whose fate the god pronounces? My lord, said Creon, before you piloted the state, we had a king named Laius. I know of him by hearsay, says Oedipus. I have not seen him. The god commanded clearly, let someone punish with force this dead man's murderers. Where are they in the world? Where would a trace of this old crime be found? Because he's been king for quite a while now, and the king, Laius, is long dead. He said, how can I find them? It would be hard to guess where. The clue is in this land, said Creon. That which is sought is found. The unheeded thing escapes. So said the god. Was it at home, said Oedipus, or in the country that death came upon him? Or in another country traveling? Oedipus doesn't even know how the king died. He went, he said, himself upon an embassy, but never returned when he set out from home. Was there no messenger, no fellow traveler who knew what happened? Such a one might tell something of use. They were all killed, said Creon, save one. He fled in terror, and he could tell us nothing in clear terms of what he knew. Nothing, but one thing only. What was it? If he could even find a slim beginning in which to hope, we might discover much, Creon. This man said the robbers they encountered were many, and the hands that did the murder were many. It was no single man's power. Oedipus, how could a robber dare a deed like this? Were he not helped with money from the city? Money and treachery. So here's Oedipus surmising, thinking how things work in power politics. Some wealthy individuals in the city paid for the king to be murdered as he left the city. That indeed was thought, said Creon. But Laius was dead, and in our trouble there was none to help. What trouble was so great to hinder you inquiring out the murder of your king? Creon, the riddling Sphinx induced us to neglect mysterious crimes and rather seek solution of troubles at our feet. Okay, so they put on the back burner the murder of the king because they had more urgent matters to attend to, namely the Sphinx destruction of the city. At which point, of course, Oedipus himself came and solved the riddle. And then Oedipus says, I will bring this to light again. King Phoebus fittingly took this care about the dead, and you too fittingly. And justly you will see in me an ally, a champion of my country and the god. For when I drive pollution from the land, I will not serve a distant friend's advantage, but act in my own interest. Whoever he was that killed the king may readily wish to dispatch me with his murderous hand. So helping the dead king, I help myself. Note the irony of which Oedipus himself is oblivious. Come, children, take your suppliant bows and go. Up from the altars now, call the assembly and let it meet upon the understanding that I'll do everything. God will decide whether we prosper or remain in sorrow. And so the priest obeys the command and says, Rise, children, it was this we came to seek, which of himself the king now offers us. May Phoebus who gave us the oracle, come to our rescue and stay the plague. Now, at this point, the chorus intervenes. Let me say a little bit about the chorus. The chorus functions in Greek dramatic theater in general, but particularly in the tragedies, as the voice of the city, to some degree, reflecting the popular mood. It's interesting, remember, as I said to you, that Sophocles himself served in the city both as a treasurer and as a general, was friends with some of the great figures of the day, the great historian Herodotus, as well as the great Pericles, the famous, arguably the most famous of the Athenian rulers, whose, as I say, his funeral ode is recounted in another great historian's account, namely Thucydides. And this is the era of Athens is known for its democracy. But also this vacillation between whether Athens would be better ruled as a democracy or better be ruled as an oligarchy, ruled by a few, or an aristocracy ruled by the best of their company. And there were varying views amongst this, but there's no doubt that the democratic aspect of the Athenian democracy is represented to some degree by the chorus. So the chorus represents the sentiments of the people and the goodwill of the people, but often also, once again, just like Oedipus himself, the folly of the people. It's obliviousness to good counsel. And so at this point, I will not read what the chorus says, but the chorus's words come forth in the form of a strophe, and then an antistrophe, and then finally an epistrophe. So at the strophe, there's a turn. So they get, if you can think of them, about they're singing, but they're also dancing and going around in a chorus in one direction. So they turn in one direction for the strophe, and then for the antistrophe, they turn back and go in the other direction. So they're going back and forth. And while they're doing this, they're speaking forth in the poetic meter of the tragedy, and calling in poetic diction, expressing the mood of the people here. And to some degree, when you're reading this aloud, and once again, I always recommend that you read literature aloud. It really does help with comprehension, and also with memory and all manner of things. That when they are speaking like this, we mustn't think of this as dialogue, as speech. It really is poetic, and it is expressive. But Oedipus, in response to this, Oedipus returns, and I'll conclude with this brief reflection, and I won't read it all because he goes on here for quite a lengthy piece here. But he says, "For what you ask me, if you will hear my words, and hearing welcome them, and fight the plague, you will find strength and lightening of your load. Hark to me," says Oedipus. "What I say to you, I say as one that is stranger to the story, as stranger to the deed. For I would not be far upon the track if I alone were tracing it without a clue. But now, since after all was finished, I became a citizen among you, citizens. Now I proclaim to all the men of Thebes, whoso among you knows the murderer, by whose hand Laius, son of Labdacus, died, I command him to tell me everything. Yes, though he fears himself to take the blame on his own head, for bitter punishment he shall have none, but leave this land unharmed." So here's Oedipus's promise. He promises clemency. The man just needs to come forward who knows about this. He will not be punished. So there's a promise here. He has a one opportunity, and it's a unique one. If he should come forward and the truth should come out, that man shall leave the land unharmed. Or if he knows the murderer, another, a foreigner, let him speak the truth, for I will pay him and be grateful too. But if you keep silence, if perhaps some one of you, to shield a guilty friend, or for his own sake, shall reject my words, hear what I shall do then. I forbid that man, whoever he be, my land where I hold sovereignty and throne, and I forbid any to welcome him, or cry him greeting, or make him a sharer in sacrifice or offering to the gods, or give him water for his hands to wash. I command all to drive him from their homes, since he is our pollution, our miasma. As the oracle of Pythos, God proclaimed him now to me. So I stand forth a champion of the god and of the man who died. Upon the murderer, I invoke this curse. Now, pay attention to the words here. Whether he is one man and all unknown, or one of many, may he wear out his life in misery to miserable doom. If with my knowledge he lives at my hearth, I pray that I myself may feel my curse. On you I lay my charge to fulfill all this for me, for the god, and for this land of ours destroyed and blighted by the god forsaken. He carries on, but you get the gist of what he's saying here. If this should, I bring the curse upon myself. And so he thereby invokes the very thing that he is going to do to the presumed perpetrator of the horrible misdeed of the murder of Laos is going to be visited upon his head. And he himself will suffer for the terrible trauma that has been visited upon the city, and of course the terrible curse that the gods have brought upon the people of Thebes. He himself will wear it in his own person. He will become the scapegoat.